Hey there. I'm gonna be very transparent and honest with you in this video. Throughout my life, I've been addicted to things like weed, porn, and lustful thinking. And coming from someone who's also been on this journey of self-development and spirituality over the last 10 years, I knew that these habits were draining my life force. I knew that they didn't serve me, but for some reason, I couldn't seem to give them up. I kept feeding the loop, even though I was aware of the problem. Well, today is day 10 with no cannabis, no porn, and I feel better than I ever have before. I've decided to stop numbing myself with these high-reward, dopamine hijacking behaviors that have kept me stuck in a low vibration. And the way that it came about actually shocked me. It didn't require me to force myself or struggle or try to make it through, because once I changed the state of being that I was operating in, it became natural and easy. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today in this video. My hope is that by sharing my journey with breaking these addictive patterns and realigning with my highest expression, it can reach someone like you who might be in a similar boat, and we can grow together. Even if your habits are different than mine, maybe yours aren't exactly weed and porn, maybe they're slightly different, this video is still going to apply. Because what I'm going to share with you is much more than that. It has to do with our unconscious patterns, our habits, and how to tune our electromagnetic frequency to match the life that we do desire. And I want to quickly start out by saying this is not going to be one of those religious videos where we talk about being saved from sin and all of that. It's not one of those no-fap videos where I tell you that weed and porn are bad and any form of sexuality is bad for your mental health and celibacy is the only way to enlightenment. I don't believe that. But as I was searching for other people talking about these topics from a spiritual lens, I couldn't really find anything. So I'm gonna share my take on this whole thing and how shifting my identity to align with my highest self changed everything for me. I had to really ask myself from an energetic standpoint, why do I keep engaging in these habits even though I know that they aren't aligned? And I've realized lately that it's more than just a bad habit. And if you're stuck in it, it doesn't mean that you're broken or need to be saved. It's an unconscious program, a feedback loop that we keep engaging in, and that's what's keeping us stuck in the reality that we want to change. But it's this catch-22, because once I learned to shift the program to align with my best version, it became easier to let these things go. And I found that I don't want to live a life where I'm constantly needing to escape and numb myself. I'd much rather be clear-headed and focused so that I can dedicate that creative life force energy to build the life that I do want to live. That way I don't need to escape in the first place. Do you see what I mean? But here's the problem. In today's day and age, there's this narrative that cannabis is just a plant, that it's medicine, and that it can be used as a spiritual tool. But I've found that that can actually become an excuse for us to misuse it and numb ourselves even further. And when it comes to porn, our society has become far too hyper-sexualized, and my use with porn was one of the ways that I would escape myself. And if you're watching this, you might relate. But here's the thing, I don't think that these habits or these activities are inherently bad. They have a time and a place, but the way in which that we're using them is the problem. The way that they sneakily take a hold of our attention and they gain control over us, that's the problem. So it's time for us to change our relationship with these things so that they no longer have control over us. And in my opinion, the goal of giving these things up is not to reach spiritual purity, because we're here to have a human experience, not to transcend these things like sex, masturbation, or orgasming, or even enjoying certain things like weed on certain occasion, right? Smoking sometimes when it's in a container, a sacred container. In this video, I'm gonna give you a grounded yet mystical perspective on both porn and cannabis use, and why the answer isn't actually so black and white. I started smoking ganja and watching porn around age 13, and I've always been a chronic user ever since. I mean, I was always the stoner, everyone knew that. I was a little weed fairy. But I kind of kept the porn pretty secret, pretty low-key for the majority of my life. And like I said, the problem here isn't the weed, it isn't the porn, or even the desires that we feel. It's how we use these things to escape ourselves and then keep perpetuating that cycle. And over time, they start draining our vital life force energy. which is the very energy that's needed to create anything in this world, but not through just ejaculation. I mean, yes, you do release your life force when you ejaculate. That's kind of the main thing that a lot of people will focus on when it comes to nofap, but I think there's a bigger problem here, and that's where our attention is being placed. Because our attention is our greatest superpower in this reality, but it's constantly being hijacked by our modern world of stimulation and easy access to high-reward, short-term pleasures. These become our biggest distraction and keep us from creating what we actually want and prefer in this life. And when we become addicted to these habits and behaviors, what they do is siphon our attention away from our bodies, away from the present moment, and into instant gratification. But we'll never truly be satisfied with these things because they aren't what our soul truly wants to create. They're these quick fixes that offer an escape. But as we keep using, our threshold for reaching pleasure gets higher and higher, meaning we need more and more in order to feel the same high, that same spark of dopamine that we once felt. So coming from a chronic porn and weed user, I continually needed more and more in order to reach that same level of satisfaction. I needed higher doses, more novelty, and that becomes your new baseline, to where you can't do anything without them. And before I knew it, I needed multiple bowls or dabs to feel anything. And I would spend hours searching for new porn scenes with more wild things, more interesting, more people involved, more novelty. And it's a problem when you can't eat food without weed first. If this is you right now, I'm urging you to listen to this message, because I was there just a few days ago. When you can't enjoy sex without being high, or without stimulation, or even worse, when you prefer a screen over real life intimacy, which was me at one point. Sometimes I would say no to real life encounters because I knew that later on I could go jerk off and get a bigger high with that. This all means that we're spreading out our energy to get quick highs that don't actually lead to fulfillment in our lives, and that causes us to need more and more. So how do we regain control of this? In my opinion, regaining control over them doesn't mean denouncing all of our earthly pleasures, like being celibate for life and never orgasming again, holding your seed in forever, and that's gonna boost your life force energy. This is the common narrative that I see often, especially in the nofap community, which I don't personally subscribe to. It's this idea that we need to hold our seed in for as long as possible and never give in to temptation. But we don't need to restrict ourselves so much, because that in and of itself is a whole other issue. Because what this does is just restricts the flow and disconnects us from having a human experience. And now our focus is so much on trying to not make it happen instead of making the things that we want to happen. So the goal is to become the master of where we place our attention, rather than these habits being the master over us. So whenever those impulses come up, not immediately acting on them and going to rub one out or going to smoke just because you felt like it. Because where we place our attention is where our energy flows. So if we're constantly placing our attention on getting high, we're using our life force energy to create more escapism. Usually that's rooted in fear, insecurity, hatred towards ourselves, even if we don't consciously realize that. When we place our attention on constantly getting off, we're creating more lustful thinking, which is actually one of the lowest possible vibrations in the scale of frequency and emotions. And usually there's a bit of shame and guilt associated with that. And all of these emotions that we feel are energy in motion, so they have a corresponding frequency. And where we resonate will form the electromagnetic field around our body. So that field is invisible to the eyes, but it's felt by those around us. And not only that, it also shapes the way through which we see the world. So this leads to a smaller lens and an inability to see the field of infinite possibility that exists in the present moment, in the quantum field. So we remain limited in our thinking. Everything feels hard, slow, and suddenly you have no drive or motivation to do the things that used to bring you joy, the things that you know you're meant to be doing. And when you're operating from this place, you're in a state of survival, constantly needing to escape your life rather than consciously creating it. Since we are the creators of our experience, and where we place our attention, and therefore our energy, is what we will experience, we'll keep staying stuck because we keep feeding that loop. When we operate from this limited, lower vibration, we're essentially choosing a certain set of neural pathways in the brain that have a limited capacity to decipher what's in front of us. Here's a simple analogy to describe what I mean. Pretend like these neural pathways activate a set of tools that we can use to accomplish a task that's in front of us. That task is our soul's path, our soul's mission. Let's pretend like I have a task of putting a nail into the wall. Seems simple, right? But this set of neural pathways, the porn, the weed, the familiar habits that we're engaging in that keep us stuck, activates a pair of scissors. Suddenly, your ability to put the nail into the wall becomes more challenging because you're trying to go about it with the wrong set of tools. So this represents our state of being, our perspective, and where we're resonating. So then a simple task like putting a nail into the wall becomes very challenging. But if you simply choose a different set of tools, aka activate a different set of neural pathways in the brain, you can create a hammer, which will make this task much easier. But if I keep activating the pair of scissors as my chosen tool through habit and repetition, which is what we're doing when we engage in that same cycle, it's going to remain very difficult to make that simple task happen. So trying to approach changing these habits from that same state of being is always going to lead to failure, because where you're resonating energetically doesn't support changing that habit to align with your newer version. And as silly as this analogy may seem, it's a simple way of recognizing that our toolkit is determined by where we are resonating. So how do we change which tools we activate? That comes down to rewiring our brains, to change our habits, to activate a different group of neural pathways, which are essentially the firing and wiring of chemicals in our brain based on our external and internal experience, based on our thoughts, habits, emotions, and beliefs. It will remain hard until you change your state of being. So when we become accustomed to a certain sequence of events, we act out of autopilot, and the brain becomes familiar with certain cues and triggers that cause the body to want to go through that familiar sequence. And the nervous system prefers what's familiar, even when it's painful. Even if we know that this is an automatic habit and we constantly want to change it, the brain still wants to fulfill its desires. Because the truth is, you're addicted to that feeling. Even if it's a negative feeling, even if it's built upon shame or grief, you're still addicted to it. So in order to create the life that we want, so we don't need to escape it anymore, we need to go down a different path. This will activate a different toolkit and new perspectives that will make it easy to create what we actually prefer. Remember, our state of being is determined by the electromagnetic frequency that we are resonating at. And that frequency is determined by the thoughts, habits, and beliefs that we're placing our attention on. Your attention is like your magic wand in this reality. Here's another way to think about it. Imagine that these neural pathways are a physical pathway, similar to a route that we may take in our 3D real-world experience. Remember, we have 3 different bodies that we exist in different planes of reality. We have our physical body, we have our mental body, and we have our spiritual body. The physical body is the one that we're most familiar with, but the mental body we are traveling through all the time. So think of the neural pathways as a familiar route that our mental body travels through to fulfill a certain set of desires based on its past experience, knowing that there's a reward at the end of it. Same way we might go down a familiar trail, knowing that there's a waterfall to enjoy at the end. And what happens is we unconsciously train our mental body to prefer these habits, to reach a hit of dopamine and other feel-good chemicals in the brain. And these habits are resonating at that lower place. So when we engage in them, we're diminishing our electromagnetic frequency. That's our aura. And in order to change that, we need to become aware of all the patterns and all the habits that have kept us stuck right here. So what cues and triggers cause us to want to go down that familiar route? I want you to become very clear on exactly what causes your brain to crave the routine pathway with the familiar reward at the end. Usually it's things like social media, since they are filled with lustful images that our brains have associated with getting off. For me, one of them was anytime I was in social situations. I had a tendency to pull out weed and want to share it with the group. It was something that I learned as a way to be kind of like part of the cool kids, because all the cool kids smoked. And once I started smoking, I got like positive reinforcement from my environment. So that created a tendency in my brain to want to showcase that whenever I'm around people, to kind of show off. And whenever I opened up Instagram, I would see a body part that I would like, and that would cause me to want to go down and fulfill that desire with porn and masturbation, or go searching for a hookup, even worse. And what that does is, because you have these cues and these triggers that come up, and then they activate that pathway. And your brain knows that there's a reward at the end of that pathway. It wants to get to that reward. So no matter how much you try to force yourself not to do it, your brain wants that. It wants that reward. So once you become very aware of exactly what it is that's causing you to desire the familiar reward, the next step is rewiring your brain to go down a different path. So what I did was I created this, if this happens, I will plan. So essentially, when I feel the urges or impulses coming up, because I've recognized what the cue is, and it's gonna come up regardless. We live in this world, so we need to be able to discipline ourselves to not allow that impulse to control what we do. So I recognize them. But then I have this escape plan of sorts, that I can engage in to give my brain some other form of reward, because that's what it wants. It will keep craving it until it gets it. So if you try to just force yourself to not partake in it and using willpower alone, the brain is gonna outsmart you, it's gonna outpower you, and you might be able to get a little bit of time, but eventually it's gonna be so loud that you're just gonna cave in and do it. And I know you've probably been there, I've been there. So the idea is to choose something that will be a productive use of your attention and energy, rather than an unproductive spiraling of habits that further keep you in the loop. The first step is always going to be to step back and clear the channel to be able to see again. Sometimes you have to slow down so that you can speed up. So we're constantly bombarded with stimulation, which acts as static in our field. It makes it harder for us to see the messages from our higher self and interpret them clearly. And those messages are what are guiding you to a true fulfilling life, to fulfill your soul's work. And from that place, the truth is you already have all the answers you're searching for. It's just that you've conditioned your mind to ignore those messages and to keep searching for short-term rewards instead. So for me, recalibrating my system meant getting back on my daily ritual of meditation, yoga, and journaling. I made it a non-negotiable. I tried to skip it for a while. I was falling off, even though I knew that those were good habits that were going to lead to the successes that I'm looking for. I just wasn't doing it for some reason. I thought I could just bypass the meditation, but you can't skip this step. So what I do now is I turn my phone on airplane mode overnight. That way I'm not tempted to look at all the notifications that are competing for my attention first thing in the morning. Because when that happens, you start spiraling and your whole day is just reacting instead of creating. Remember, your attention is your greatest superpower. So I don't turn my phone on until I have gone within. For me, this includes a bit of conscious movement first thing. I personally practice yoga to move the energy, the breath, get the blood flowing before going into my morning meditation. And your self-care practice might be different. Maybe you go for a walk or a run or dance or do something else that allows you to simply be with yourself. I recommend trying yoga. The purpose of yoga is to prepare the body for meditation. And this meditation doesn't need to be anything fancy or special. All you need to do is simply sit with yourself. It could be as simple as 10 minutes each morning. I personally meditate for 30 minutes. So I do 45 minutes of seated because I'll do 15 minutes of breath work, which gets the energy really moving. And I recommend trying that because it changes the game. Once you actually enter your deep meditation, you're able to really focus and clear and sit in a state of no mind. But for you, it could be something simpler if you're not in that state. Regardless, you need to have time with yourself to shut off everything else. And the goal is to just simply be with yourself, to observe the thoughts that are coming up. Set yourself a timer so that you aren't constantly thinking about how long it's been. Has it been 10 minutes yet? And then during that time, like I said, your only job is to just sit there, be with yourself, and breathe. And the thoughts are gonna come up, that's natural, and that's actually the point of this. Because when they do come up, what you need to do is notice them. Notice what patterns came about, where did it take you, what were you just thinking about, and then redirect your attention back to the present moment with your breath. Coming back to the inhale and the exhale. This is like our little pendulum that brings us back to the moment, the here, the ever-present, infinite moment. And over time, you'll get better with this, and you'll start to train yourself to slow down and become the observer of your thoughts rather than the victim of them. And the idea is that you start to take this awareness with you outside of your meditation. So once the timer's done and you get up, you don't just go back to being in a state of reactivity. You want to try to keep that awareness of everything that's happening in your vortex. Because once you start spiraling into that autopilot, that's where you get led down those pathways. And you know what's at the end of those pathways. So you have to start going into the unknown. And once you start doing this consistently, you will find it easier to notice the patterns that take you down that spiral. You'll also find it easier to listen to the messages from your higher self. And suddenly your next steps become clear. And from this place, you're operating from a higher state. You're no longer in autopilot. You're no longer in that lower frequency with limited awareness. And the point of doing this is so that you can start to consciously choose where you place your attention. You take back control of where you place your attention and thus your energy, choosing a different set of habits and behaviors. It becomes so much easier at that point. You're no longer trying to force it to happen from a limited state of being. Now you're consciously choosing what you affirm and regain your vital creative life force. Now you don't need to escape. Now you find it easier to engage in these things in moderation. That's how I feel. I don't want to go get high anymore. I actually prefer being in this state now. I don't want to go watch porn. I know where that's going to lead me. I've been there before. And once you sit in this frequency long enough, it becomes easy to say no. And the honest truth is, we can't do any of this if we're still numbing our true selves with weed and porn. It will just never work. If you found value in this video, I'm so grateful that you're here, and it would mean the world to me if you considered sticking around, of course, if that resonates. And if you want to learn more about how I actually shifted my energy and quantum leaped from where I was before to where I am now, I'd suggest watching this video where I talk about the process of creation and how to leverage it to create the life that you want to live in alignment with your soul's true purpose. And I'll see you there.